it going?
Hi, Sarah. Good. How are you today?
Doing great. I'm
Been a couple
glad
weeks since I've talked to you.
it has been. And I feel like, by doing this every 2 weeks, we just have more content to share. And it's interesting. Things are definitely happening and changing and moving right along.
Absolutely. There's a lot to talk about today, too.
For sure, for sure. So we're going to cover, what's going on with forbearance. Lydia has some insight on what's happening with some tax liens and what we're seeing there, what's going on with the servicing companies. So there's a lot to cover. I'll go ahead and just dive right into it with our forbearance numbers. So for 15 weeks straight, the forbearance numbers have actually been declining, which is awesome. There's now about 2 million loans in forbearance, which is right around 4.04% of all mortgages nationwide. So that number continues to decline. Forbearance by stage. So if we're looking at what's going on with the groups within forbearance, 10.6% of borrowers are in their initial stage. And these requests have actually dropped to their lowest level since March of 2020, which is good. So the extension, this is the biggest group. It's 83.6% of borrowers are in this group, and well over 50% of these borrowers are actually reaching have been in for over 12 months, and a huge number of them are reaching their 15-month kind of marker, which is the end of their forbearance plan. So they're actually expecting in the month of June for us to have around 700,000 exits. We'll see what happens, but that's a really big number. We have had over 100,000 so far, so we'll kind of be watching that closely. And then 5.8% of forbearance borrowers are reentries, which is this number's been increasing in previous weeks. On the in the area of the exits, 45.7% of borrowers continued making their payments or got caught up upon exit, or they paid off the loan by doing, selling it or a refinance, something like that. So, we are seeing, that's a big portion of it, but that number has gone down a little bit, a little bit each week. And the number that has been going up a little bit each week is the number of borrowers that are exiting their plan still behind on their payments without a loss mitigation plan in place. That has gone up to 15.3% of borrowers. And this is what Mike, Fred, and Tony with the Mortgage Bankers Association said about this. So I'm going to quote him directly. He said, "We're seeing an increase in share of forbearance exits where borrowers do not have a loss mitigation plan in place. Homeowners are reaching the end of their forbearance term. They need to contact their servicer to discuss the next steps in the process, as servicers cannot extend the forbearance term without talking to the borrower." Right. So it's super important that everybody talks to their servicer. Some big news.
Some of the servicers too have different options for them. So until they talk to them, they don't know what their options are.
Exactly. And they're not as scary as everybody thinks. So make those calls. And, right now, so the FHFA did announce one type of forbearance extension, but it is only for multifamily investment properties, or rental properties, not even just for an investment. It has to have a tenant. The extension is through the end of September, and the landlord also has to extend all of the, kind of tenant protections that were put in place by previous moratoriums. So they, for example, they cannot evict a tenant solely for lack of payment. Now, there's a number of different, criteria that needs to be hit, of course. And we'll be, kind of paying attention to how that moves forward or what that looks like over the coming months. Everything else, all the other groups, the foreclosure options expires at the end of June. We've got 2 weeks. One thing I also wanted to note is the eviction ban that's also set to expire at the end of this month. We haven't heard anything either way about an extension or not, but we do know that a lot of industry leaders have written letters to the CDC really encouraging them to allow the eviction ban to expire and let it go away. I mean, that includes MBA, NAR, a lot of these big organizations. So we'll see what happens. So far, there's been no announcement about any type of extension aside from the one that we just talked about.
Right. And just to reiterate what you just said too, it's only on multifamily. It's not on single family rentals. It's
Exactly.
multifamily rentals, correct?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes, good point. Thank you for clarifying that, because
Yeah.
it's
It's
important.
confusing.
I mean, all of this is, and that's why it's like, everybody just needs to talk to their lender, because there's just
Yes.
so much going on. And
Right.
then, add another layer to it. The CFPB is, the finance watchdog, and they're looking to make examples out of the lenders and servicers if they're crossing any lines, and they're really looking in regards to forbearance and how it's been handled.
Yes.
With the administration change, so did the CFPB leadership. And the organization wasn't policing quite as hard over 2018 through 2020. They fined about $800 million. Like, companies were fined about $800 million. From 2012 to 2018, the CFPB fined companies over $12 billion. So we do know that they're kind of looking, and the new leadership, this was, I'm going to quote them also. It says, they're looking to pin some heads to the wall and show that there's a new cop on the beat. They want to make some examples. So this is definitely going to make the servicers very aware that they have they're under a microscope. So we'll see what, impact that has, or what they do. We can't speak to all these servicing companies, but it'll be interesting.
Yes, definitely.
The last thing I wanted to share was kind of talking about, so we've talked a lot about the increasing equity environment and, kind of looking at how many options people have. We also need to mention, there's been a lot of responsible lending over the last 10 years. People can afford their payments. People didn't get into these crazy loans that they were getting into 15 years ago. And so I've got kind of an interesting chart that I want to share that really shows kind of what I'm talking about. Is like, you look at the outstanding mortgage debt, we kind of peaked, when the market crashed, but then it stayed relatively flat on the outstanding mortgage debt. But then you look here at the homeowners equity position. So again, we're really still in a very, very solid place where so many homeowners have equity. And I think that's a very important point, as we've talked about kind of what we're up against, with borrowers who are struggling, because, I don't want to diminish that, but that amount of equity gives them options.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. For sure. Thank you, Sarah, because that really is a good, I like vision. I'm a visual learner, so I like your charts and things like that.
Wonderful.
But the other thing that's been happening too, and it's just started in the last couple of weeks, is I've had a couple of papers that I've had to give to homeowners, and they are tax lien notifications that they are in a position where their home might get foreclosed on. And we haven't really talked about tax liens at all, but you and I have done a little bit of research, and we know that even the tax lien foreclosures have been suspended kind of across the nation. Every state has their own tax lien process. And I used to actually buy tax liens years ago, and I know that there is a process to go through the foreclosure.
Yeah, it's very different than
totally different
what you do for the auction.
Exactly. But that being said, when it came to the pandemic, that kind of stopped all foreclosures of any kind. And I suspect that the tax liens were also one of those that was at least suspended. And we don't know if it's going to be, if after June 30th, if that's going to end up being, people will start being foreclosed on for the tax liens. So just
for those, you were thinking, you're not, did these borrowers, or are these borrowers, are they in forbearance? Do they have a loan at all? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, most of them, at least from what I can gather, most of them do not have a loan on it, because most lenders are going to end up paying their taxes, because that's what's happened the last year. When the forbearances hit, the lenders were still paying their mortgage insurance and their taxes. because they didn't want to go into a foreclosure situation. So if you have a mortgage, most of those have already been prepaid by your servicing company or the lender. So they are going to have to, you are going to have to pay that back at some point, which is probably part of some of those fees that are with the forbearance that we've been talking about, you know, the late fees and all the extra fees. But on the tax liens, most of them, I mean, in general, most tax liens are people who don't have a mortgage and they don't realize that they have to make that tax payment every twice a year, because a lot of times their lender did it for them, and then they and then they pay it off. 30-year loan gets paid off, and then all of a sudden, so what has happened over the years is they might get 1 or 2 late payment documents and then start realizing that they have to make that payment. So that is something that I'm going to kind of take a watch for.
Well, so why do you think that you would be, you know, if there's no loan on it, why would a servicer be asking you to go and inspect these houses? I mean, do you think it has anything to do with some of the other customers of the servicer?
Yeah, so the servicing company has a lot of iBuyers, and you know, they just want eyes on the property right before they are closed. And so they want somebody to go out, and that's why they hire the servicing company to have me go out, take photos, see what the outside condition is, and if there's any repairs that look like need to be done. Because when they first originally talk to these folks, they actually go into the home and take the inside photos to get them a price. So this is like the last, right before the closing, they have someone last come in and just kind of take photos to look at the last final, because many of them, some of them have actually had moving trucks in front of them, and people have been moving out while they're going taking. Yeah. So, but and that could be what it is, that some of these tax lien documents are from companies that are either the owners of the taxes that they've been paying, or they're trying to get the properties for a discounted price. So, but I will definitely, and that just came up over the last couple of weeks since you and I talked. So it will be interesting to find out if I see more of those and what's going on. So I'm going to kind of keep an eye out on that for us. But at this point, there's been no talk of extending the the foreclosure moratorium at the end of this month. I do have messages into a couple of asset managers, and I haven't heard back yet, but I suspect, or the last time I spoke to the servicing managers, they did not think that they were going to be extended, because there really was no reason for. The economy's doing well, people have jobs, people are back to work, so if you want a job, you can get a job. That's all there is to it. So the servicing company does not believe that they are going to be extending that. You and I are meeting on June 30th. So we will hopefully have more information at that point. Now, you and I had talked about, you know, they could extend it after the 30th and just retro to the 30th, but it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. You know,
I mean, it will.
It's really it's going to be interesting how all of these different organizations come together on whether they're going to extend the moratorium on forbearances and foreclosures, how the tax liens are going to be part of that, because technically a tax lien does get foreclosed on. It's a different process, but it still is a
foreclosure. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So the whole thing will be interesting over the next 2 weeks. And of course, if anything breaks before June 30th, you and I will get on and we'll talk about it. But I suspect we'll have a lot more details of many different aspects of these different foreclosures and forbearances.
For sure. For sure.
Yeah. So, but the main point I want to just reiterate to people is, if you are an agent, make sure to tell your clients, you know, if you did a forbearance, talk to the servicing company. That's the only way. If you don't talk to the servicing company, they're going to assume that you can't make that payment, and they will start foreclosure process. So, you know, don't give up your equity because you didn't make a phone call to the servicing company.
It's not worth it.
And it's not worth it. And, you know, I've had a couple of clients, I have my own clients that have done forbearances, and they've asked me my advice on it. And I've told them, I said, if you decide to go forward and make that loan modification, which what the forbearance is a loan modification. If you decide to make that loan modification a permanent loan modification, get with a real estate attorney just to have them look through the documents. And a couple of them have said, well, can we even change the terms? Well, depending on the servicing company, you might be able to get them to change your terms that will work it out. And if not, if they're not willing to change the terms on those loan modifications, at least have someone that can read through it and say, okay, this is what you're agreeing to, so that you know going forward what you agree to. So,
Yes.
you know,
Very
education smart. And knowing what your options are, to me, is powerful.
100%. Yeah. No, that's really good advice, especially, you know, being in title and, you know, after we had all the different loan modifications 15 years ago, when we were then, you know, people did their modification, they made their payments and later on went to sell their properties. The terms in the loan modification agreement matter, because when we would get the payoffs and when we're looking at what, you know, some of the borrowers had agreed to, they didn't remember, you know, signing off on some of these terms. So it's really important that you know what you're agreeing to. Yes, Lydia, thank you for bringing that up. It's a big important point.
It's super important, especially now that we're towards the middle of June and this is now coming to fruition at the end of June. It's more important now. I mean, we've been talking about this for almost a year, since July of last year, Sarah.
Wow.
And we're at a point now where we have been reiterating the same thing over and over and over again, to talk to the servicing company, know what your options are, and make the best decision for you and your family.
Definitely. That's well said.
Yeah. Thanks.
Awesome. Well, you know, Lydia, thank you so much for your time and, you know, great information, and 2 weeks left.
Yes. So we'll definitely be on June 30th, and we will get you all the latest of what's going on with forbearances, taxes, tax liens, the moratorium, the foreclosures, whatever information we can get you, we will have it for you on June 30th.
Perfect. Sounds good.
Thanks, Sarah.
All right. Well, thanks, Lydia. We'll see you soon.
Have a good week. Take care.
You too. Bye.